VIII. It was a cold, wet evening, such as many happen even towards the end of August, and the wart did not know how to bear himself indoors. He spent some time in the kennels, talking to Goat and Cavall, then wandered off to help them turn the spit in the kitchen. But there it was too hot. He was not forced to stay indoors because of the rain by his female supervisors, as happens all too frequently to the decadent children of the present generation, but the mere wetness and dreariness in the open discouraged him from going out. He hated everybody.
"Confound the boy," said Sir Ector. "For goodness sake, stop moping by the window there, and go and find your tutor. When I was a boy, we always used to study on wet days. Yes, and educate our minds."
"Wart's stupid," said Kay. "I'll run along, my duck," said their old nurse. "I hain't got time to attend to thy mopesies now, what with all this sorbent washing."
"Now then, my young master," said Hob, "let thee run off to thy quarters, and stop confusing the fowls." "No, no," said the sergeant. "You up orf art off here, or got enough to do polishing of this burr lady harbour."
Even the dog boy barked at him when he went back to the kennels. Wart draggled off to the tower room, where Merlin was busy knitting himself a woolen nightcap for the winter. "I cast off 2 together at every other line," said Merlin, "but for some reason it seems to end too sharply, like an onion, you know. It's the turning of the heel that does you, every time." "I think I ought to have some more education," said the wart. "I can't think of anything to do."
"You think that education is something that ought to be done when all else fails?" inquired Merlin nastily, for he was in a bad mood too.
"Well," said the wart, "some sort of education."
"Mine?" asked the magician with flashing eyes.
"Oh, Merlin," exclaimed the wart without answering, "please give me something to do, because I feel so miserable. Nobody wants me for anything today, and I just don't know how to be sensible. It rains so."
"You should learn to knit."
"Couldn't I go out and be something, a fish or anything like that?"
"You've been a fish," said Merlin. "Nobody with any go needs to do their education twice."
"Well, could I be a bird?"
"If you knew anything at all," said Merlin, "which you don't, you would know that a bird doesn't like to fly in the rain because it wets its feathers and makes them stick together. They get bedraggled."
"I could be a hawk in Hobbs' Mews," said the wart stoutly. "Then I should be indoors and shouldn't get wet."
"That's pretty ambitious," said Merlin, "to want to be a hawk."
"You know you will turn me into a hawk when you want to," shouted the wart. "But you like to plague me because it's wet. I won't have it."
"Hoity-toity," said Merlin.
"Please," said the wart, "dear Merlin, turn me into a hawk. If you don't do that, I shall do something. I don't know what." Merlin put down his knitting and looked at his pupil over the top of his spectacles.
"My boy," he said, "you shall be everything in the world, animal, vegetable, or mineral for all I care, before I've done with you. But you really will have to trust to my superior foresight. Or is it backsight? The time is not ripe for you to be a hawk. For one thing, Hob is still in the mews feeding them. And you may just as well sit down for the moment and learn to be a human being."
"Very well," said the wart. if that's a go. And he sat down. After several minutes, he said, is one allowed to speak as a human being, or does the thing about being seen and not heard have to apply?
Everybody can speak.
That's good, because I wanted to mention that you have been knitting your beard into that nightcap for 3 rows now.
Well, all be fiddled.
I should think the best thing would be to cut off the end of your beard. Shall I fetch some scissors?
Why didn't you tell me before?
I wanted to see what would happen,
You run a grave risk, my boy, said Merlin coldly, of being turned into a piece of bread and toasted.
With this, he slowly began to unpick his beard, muttering to himself, meanwhile, and taking the greatest precautions not to drop a stitch. Will it be as difficult to fly, asked the wart when he thought his tutor had calmed down, as it was to swim?
You won't need to fly. I don't mean to turn you into a loose hawk, but only to set you in the mews for the night so that you can talk to the others. That's the way to learn, by listening to the experts.
Will they talk?
They talk every night deep into the darkness. They say about how they were taken and what they can remember of their homes, about their lineage and the great deeds of their ancestors, about their training and what they have learned and will learn. It is military talk, really, like you might have in the mess of a crack cavalry regiment. Tactics, small arms, maintenance, betting, famous hunts, wine, women, and song. Another subject they have, continued Merlin, is food. It's a depressing thought, but of course they are mainly trained by hunger. They're a hungry lot, poor chaps, thinking of the best restaurants where they used to go, and how they had champagne and caviar and gypsy music. Of course, they all come of noble blood.
What a shame that they should be kept prisoners and hungry.
Well, they don't really understand that they are prisoners any more than the cavalry officers do. They look on themselves as being dedicated to their profession, like an order of knighthood or something like that. You see, the membership of the Mews is, after all, restricted to raptors, and that does help a lot. They know that none of the lower classes can get in. Their screen perches don't carry blackbirds or such trash as that. And then, as to the hungry parts, they are far from starving or that kind of hunger. They are in training, you know, and like everybody in strict training, they think about food.
How soon can I begin?
You can begin now if you want to, for my insight tells me that Hob has this minute finished for the night. But first of all, you must choose what kind of hawk you would prefer to be.
I should like to be a Merlin, said the wart politely. This answer pleased the magician.
A very good choice, he said, and if you please, we will proceed at once.
The wart got up from his stool and stood in front of his tutor. Merlin put down his knitting.
First you go small,
said Merlin, pressing him on the top of the head until he was a bit smaller than a pigeon.
Then you stand on the ball of your toes, bend at the knees, hold your elbows to your sides, lift your hands to the level of your shoulders, and press your first and second fingers together, as also your third and fourth. Look, it is like this.
With these words, the aged magician stood upon tiptoe and did as he explained. The wart copied him carefully and wondered what would happen next. What did happen was that Merlin, who had been saying the final spells under his breath, suddenly turned himself into a condor, leaving the wart standing on tiptoe unchanged. He stood there as if he were drying himself in the sun, with a wingspread of about 11 feet, a bright orange head, and a magenta carbuncle. He looked very surprised and rather funny. Come back, said the wart. You've changed the wrong one.
It's this, by Our Lady Spring Cleaning, exclaimed Merlin, turning back into himself. Once you let a woman into your study for half an hour, you don't know where to lay your hands on the right spell, not if it was ever so. Stand up, and we'll try again.
This time the now tiny wart felt his toes shooting out and scratching on the floor. He felt his heels rise and stick out behind, and his knees draw into his stomach. His thighs got quite short. A web of skin grew from his wrists to his shoulders, while his primary feathers burst out into little soft quills from the end of his fingers and quickly grew. His secondaries sprouted out along his forearms, and a charming little false primary sprang from the end of each thumb. The dozen feathers of his tail, with the double-deck feathers in the middle, grew out in the twinkling of an eye, and all the covert feathers of his back and breast and shoulders slipped out of the skin to hide the roots of the more important plumes. Wart looked quickly at Merlin, ducked his head between his legs and had a look through there, rattled his feathers into place, and began to scratch his chin with the sharp talon of one toe.
Good, said Merlin. Now hop up on my hand. Oh, be careful and don't gripe, and listen to what I have to tell you. I shall take you into the mews now that Hob has locked up for the night, and I shall put you loose and unhooded beside Balin and Balin. Now pay attention. Don't go close to anybody without speaking first. You must remember that most of them are hooded and might be startled into doing something rash. You can trust Balin and Balin, also the kestrel and the sparhawk. Don't go within reach of the falcon unless she invites you to. On no account must you stand beside Colley's special enclosure, for he is hooded and will go for you through the mesh if he gets half a chance. He is not quite right in his brains, poor chap, and if he once grips you, you will never leave that grip again. Remember that you are visiting a kind of Spartan military mess. These fellows are regulars. As the junior subaltern, your only business is to keep your mouth shut, speak when you're spoken to, and not interrupt.
I bet I'm more than a subaltern, said the wart, if I am a Merlin.
Well, as a matter of fact, you are. You will find that both the kestrel and the sparhawk are polite to you, but for all sake's sake, don't interrupt the senior Merlins or the falcon. She's the honorary colonel of the regiment, you know. And as for Corley, well, he's a colonel too, even if he is infantry, so you must mind your P's and Q's.
I will be careful, said the wart, who was beginning to feel rather scared.
Good. I shall come for you in the morning before Hob is up.
All the hawks were silent as Merlin carried their new companion into the mews, and silent for some time afterwards when they had been left in the dark. The rain had given place to a full August moonlight, so clear that you could see a woolly bear caterpillar 15 yards away out of doors, as it climbed up and up the knobbly sandstone of the great keep, and it took the wart only a few moments for his eyes to become accustomed to the diffused brightness inside the mews. The darkness became watered with light, with silver radiance, and then it was an eerie sight which dawned upon his vision. Each hawk or falcon stood in the silver upon one leg, the other tucked up inside the apron of its panel, and each was a motionless statue of a knight in armor. They stood gravely in their plumed helmets, spurred and armed. The canvas or sacking screens of their perches moved heavily in the breath of wind, like banners in a chapel, and the rapt nobility of the air kept their night's vigil in nightly patience. In those days they used to hood everything they could, even the goshawk and the merlin, which are no longer hooded according to modern practice. Wart drew his breath at the sight of all these stately figures, standing so still that they might have been cut of stone. He was overwhelmed by their magnificence, and felt no need of Merlin's warning that he was to be humble and behave himself. Presently there was a gentle ringing of a bell. The great peregrine falcon had bestirred herself, and now said, in a high nasal voice which came from her aristocratic nose, "Gentlemen, you may converse." There was dead silence. Only in the far corner of the room, which had been netted off for coaling, loose there, unhooded and deep in malt, they could hear a faint muttering from the choleric infantry colonel.
"Damned fools," he was mumbling. "Damned administration. Damned politicians. Is this a damned dagger that I see before me? The handle towards my hand? Damned spot. Now, Colley, hast thou but one brief hour to live, and then thou must be damned perpetually."
"Colonel," said the peregrine coldly, "not before the young officers."
"I beg your pardon, ma'am," said the poor colonel at once. "It's something that gets into my head, you know. Some deep damnation."
There was silence again, formal, terrible, and calm. "Who is the new officer?" inquired the first fierce and beautiful voice. Nobody answered. "Speak for yourself, sir," commanded the peregrine, looking straight before her as if she were talking in her sleep. They could not see him through their hoods. "Please," began the wart, "I am a Merlin," and he stopped, scared in the stillness. Balin, who was one of the real Merlins standing beside him, leaned over and whispered quite kindly in his ear,
"Don't be afraid. Call her madam."
"I am a Merlin, madam, and it please you." "A Merlin, that is good. And what branch of Merlins do you stoop from?" The wart did not know in the least what branch he stooped from, but he dared not be found out now in his life. "Madam," said the wart, "I am one of the Merlins of the forest sauvage." There was silence at this again, the silver silence which she had begun to dread. "There are the Yorkshire Merlins," said the honorary colonel in her slow voice at last, "and the Welsh Merlins, and the McMerlins of the north. Then there are the Salisbury ones, and several from the neighborhood of Exmoor. I don't think I have ever heard of any family in the forest sauvage."
"It could be a cadet branch, madam," said Balin. "I dare say."
"Bless him," thought the wart, "I shall catch him a special sparrow tomorrow and give it to him behind Hobbs' back. That will be the solution, Captain Balin, no doubt." The silence fell again. At last the peregrine rang her bell. She said, "We will proceed with the catechism prior to swearing him in." The wart heard the sparhawk to his left, giving several nervous coughs at this, but the peregrine paid no attention. "Merlin of the forest sauvage," said the peregrine, "what is a beast of the foot?" "A beast of the foot," replied the wart, blessing his stars that Sir Ector had chosen to give him a first-rate education, "is a horse, or a hound, or a hawk." "Why are these called beasts of the foot?" "Because these beasts depend upon the power of the feet, so that, by law, any damage to the feet of a hawk, hound, or horse is reckoned as damage to its life. A lamed horse is a murdered horse." "Good," said the peregrine. "What are your most important members?" "My wings," said the wart after a moment, guessing because he did not know. At this there was a simultaneous tintinnabulation of all the bells, as each graven image lowered its raised foot in distress. They stood up on both feet now, disturbed. "Your what?" cried the peregrine sharply.
He said his damned wings,
said Colonel Coley from his private enclosure.
And damned be he who first cries, "Hold! Enough!"
"But even a thrush has wings," cried the humble kestrel, speaking for the first time in his sharp-beaked alarm. "But even a thrush has wings."
"Think,"
whispered Balin under his breath. The wart thought feverishly. A thrush had wings, tail, eyes, legs, apparently everything. "My talons." "It will do," said the peregrine kindly, after one of her dreadful pauses. "The answer ought to be feet, just as it is to all the other questions, but talons will do." All the hawks, and of course we are using the term loosely, for some were hawks and some were falcons, raised their belled feet again and sat at ease. "What is the first law of the foot?"
"Think,"
said friendly little Balin behind his false primary. The wart thought and thought right. "Never let go," he said. "Last question," said the peregrine. "How would you, as a merlin, kill a pigeon bigger than yourself?" Wart was lucky in this one, for he had heard Hob giving a description of how Balin did it one afternoon, and he answered warily, "I should strangle her with my foot." "Good," said the peregrine. "Bravo!" cried all the others, raising their feathers.
90%,
said the sparhawk after a quick sum. "That is, if you give him a half foot the talons."
"The devil damn me black!"
"Colonel, please." Little Balin whispered to the wart.
"Colonel Coley is not quite right in his wits. It is his liver, we believe, but the kestrel says it is the constant strain of living up to her ladyship's standard. He says that her ladyship spoke to him from her full rank once, cavalry to infantry, you know, and that he just closed his eyes and got the vertigo. He had never been the same since."
"Captain Balin," said the peregrine, "it is rude to whisper. We will proceed to swear the new officer in. Now, Padre, if you please." The poor sparhawk, who had been getting more and more nervous for some time, blushed deeply and began faltering out a complicated oath about varvels, jesses, and hoods.
"With this Varvel,"
the wart heard,
"I thee endow love, honor, and obey, so just us two part."
but before the padre had got to the end of it, he broke down altogether and sobbed out,
"Oh, please, your ladyship, I beg your pardon, but I've forgotten to keep any tirings." "Tirings are bones and things,"
explained Balin.
"and of course you have to swear on bones."
"Forgotten to keep any tirings, but it is your duty to keep tirings."
"I know."
"What have you done with them?" The sparhawk's voice broke at the enormity of his confession.
"Oh, I ate 'em,"
wept the unfortunate priest. Nobody said anything. The dereliction of duty was too terrible for mere words. All stood on 2 feet and turned their blind heads towards the culprit. Not a word of reproach was spoken. Only during an utter silence of 5 minutes they could hear the incontinent priest sniveling and hiccoughing to himself. "Well," said the peregrine at last, "the initiation will be put off till tomorrow."
If you will excuse me, madam, said Balin, perhaps we could manage the ordeal part of it tonight. I believe the candidate is loose, for I did not hear him being tied up.
At the mention of ordeal, the wart trembled within himself and privately determined that Balin should have not one feather of Balin's sparrow next day. Thank you, Captain Balin. I was reflecting upon that subject myself. Balin shut up. Are you loose, candidate? Oh, madam, yes, I am, if you please. But I don't think I want an ordeal. The ordeal is customary. Let me see, continued the honorary colonel reflectively. What was the last ordeal we had? Can you remember, Captain Balin?
My ordeal, ma'am, said the friendly Merlin, was to hang by my jesses during the third watch.
If he's loose, he can't do that.
You could strike him yourself, ma'am, said the kestrel. Judiciously, you know. Send him over to stand by Colonel Coley while we ring thrice, said the other Merlin. Oh, no, cried the crazy colonel in an agony out of his remoter darkness. Oh, no, your ladyship. I beg you to do not do that. I am such a damned villain, your ladyship, and I don't answer for the consequences. Spare the poor boy, your ladyship, and lead us not into temptation.
Colonel, control yourself. That ordeal will do very well. Oh, madam, I was warned not to stand by Colonel Colley. Warned? And by whom? The poor wart realized now that he must choose between confessing himself a human and learning no more of their secrets, or going through with his ordeal in order to earn his education. He did not want to be a coward. I will stand by the colonel, madam, he said immediately, noticing that his voice sounded insulting. The peregrine falcon paid no attention to the tone. It is well, she said, but first we must have the hymn. Now, Padre, if you haven't eaten your hymns as well as your tirings, will you be so kind as to lead us in ancient but modern number 23, the ordeal hymn? And you, Mr. Key, she added to the kestrel, you had better keep quiet, for you are always too high. The hawk stood still in the moonlight, while the sparhawk counted
1, 2, 3.
Then all those curved or toothed beaks opened in their hoods to a brazen unison, and this is what they fiercely chanted.
Life is blood shed and offered. The eagle's eye can face this dream. To beasts of chase the lie is proffered. Timor mortis can turbat me. The beast of foot sings hold fast only, for flesh is bruckle and foot is sleek. Strength to the strong and the lordly and lonely, timor mortis exult at me. Shame to the slothful and woe to the weak one. Death to the dreadful who turn to flee. Blood to the tearing, the taloned, the beak one. Timor mortis is me.
Very nice, said the peregrine. Captain Balin, I think you were a little off on the top of C. And now, candidate, you will go over and stand next to Colonel Colley's enclosure while we ring our bells thrice. On the third ring, you may move as quickly as you like. Very good, madam, said the wart, quite fearless with resentment. He flipped his wings and was sitting on the extreme end of the screen perch next to Colley's enclosure of string netting.
Boy, boy, cried the colonel in an unearthly voice, don't come near me. Don't come near. Tempt not the foul fiend to his damnation.
I don't fear you, sir, said the wart. Don't vex yourself, for no harm will come to either of us.
No harm, quotha! I'll go before it is too late. I feel eternal longings in me.
Never fear, sir. They have only to ring 3 times. At this, all the knights lowered their raised legs and gave them a solemn shake. The first sweet, persuasive tinkling filled the room.
Madam, madam,
Cried the colonel in torture.
have pity on a damned man of blood. Ring out the old, ring in the new. I can't hold off much longer.
Be brave, sir, said the wart softly.
Be brave, sir. Why, but 2 nights since, one met the Duke about midnight in a lane behind St. Mark's Church, with the leg of a man upon his shoulder, and he howled fearfully.
It's nothing, said the wart.
Nothing. Said he was a wolf. Only the difference was a wolf's skin was hairy on the outside, his on the inside. Rip up my flesh and dry. Ah, for quietus with a bare bodkin.
The bells rang for the second time. The wart's heart was thumping heavily and pleading for the third release. But now the colonel was sidling towards him along the perch. Stamp, stamp, he went, striking the wood he trod on with a convulsive grip at every pace. His poor, mad, brooding eyes glared in the moonlight, shone against the persecuted darkness of his scowling brow. There was nothing cruel about him, no ignoble passion. He was terrified of the wart, not triumphing, and he must slay.
If it were done when 'tis done, whispered the colonel, then 'twere well it were done quickly. Who would have thought the young man had so much blood in him?
Colonel, said the wart, but held himself there.
Boy,
Cried the colonel,
speak, stop me, mercy.
there is a cat behind you, said the wart calmly, or a pine marten. Look. The colonel turned, swift as a wasp's sting, and menaced into the gloom. There was nothing. He swung his wild eyes again upon the wart, guessing at the trick. Then, in the cold voice of an adder,
The bell invites me,
he hissed for the last time.
Hear it not, Merlin, for it is a knell that summons thee to heaven or to hell.
The third bells were indeed ringing as he spoke, and honor was allowed to move. The ordeal was over, and the wart might fly, but as he flew, quicker than any movement or flight in the world, the terrible sickles had shot out from the colonel's plated leg. Not flashed out, for they moved too quick for sight, and with a thump, with a clutch, with an apprehension like being arrested by a big policeman, the great scimitars had fixed themselves in his retreating thumb. They fixed themselves, and fixed irrevocably. Gripe, gripe, the enormous thigh muscles tautened in 2 convulsions. Then the wart was 4 yards further down the screen, and Colonel Colley was standing on one foot with a few meshes of string netting and the wart's false primary, with its covert feathers, vice-fisted in the other. 2 or 3 minor feathers drifted softly in the moonbeam towards the floor.
Well stood,
cried Balin, delighted. A very gentlemanly exhibition, said the peregrine, not minding that Captain Balin had spoken before her.
Amen, amen,
said the sparhawk.
Brave hearts,
cried the kestrel.
Might we give him the triumph song?
asked Balin, now relenting. Certainly, said the peregrine, and they all sang together, led by Colonel Colley at the top of his voice, all belling triumphantly in the terrible moonlight.
The mountain birds are sweeter, but the valley birds are fatter, and so we deemed it meeter to carry off the latter. We met a cowering gony,
and struck 'em through the vitals. The coney was like honey, and squealed our acquittals. Some struck the lark in feathers, whose puffing clouds were shed off. Some plucked the partridge's nethers, while the others pulled his head off. But Wart, the king of Merlins, struck foot most far before us. His birds and beasts supply and feast, and his feasts are roarous chorus.
Mark my words, cried the beautiful Balin, forgetful of all etiquette.
We shall have a regular king in that young candidate. Now then, boys, chorus all together for the last time. But Wart, the king of Merlins, struck foot most far before us. His birds and beasts supply our feasts, and his damn fine show,
cried Colonel Colley with most lamentable infantry manners at the top of his crazy voice, quite out of tune.
our chorus.